Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your patience as we got started late, and we appreciate your patience also with our technical difficulties. So we do want you to participate and be a part of our workshop today. So please do chat in any introductions for yourself and your garden, and as well as any questions that you have throughout this workshop. My name is Lauren Hickman. I'm a program specialist with Tarrant Area Food Bank. And today we'll be discussing all of the basics of how to get a backyard compost pile started. We're gonna go ahead and jump today, and again, please feel free to ask questions and we'll try to answer those at the end of our workshop today as often as we're able. So what we're doing when we're making compost in our backyard is mimicking a system that we find in nature to create decomposed organic matter. So we are not creating soil, which is broken down from rock. What we are doing is helping to decompose living matter or matter that was once living into something that we can use to feed our gardens. So why would we want to do this? This is a system that we can use for a number of purposes. We want to build compost piles because it helps us reduce some of the waste that might otherwise be going into our landfills. For some of you, this may be the primary reason you want to do this. It may mean a smaller trash can for you, which saves money around your household expenses. It also improves your soil and the quality and texture of the nutrients and the texture of the soil. So that's another excellent reason. As the food bank, we want to encourage people to grow their own food, and we want to make sure that that food is as nutritious and as healthy for people as possible, which is one of the reasons that composting is an active part of our program. We are also interested in composting as a form of exercise. Composting, especially if you're doing hot composting, is a great exercise for 30 minutes to an hour about once a week. It's a great opportunity to get outside and get moving. We also want to make sure that our food is as affordable as possible. And the less soil amendments and compost and nutrients that we have to purchase for our gardens, the less expensive our food growing efforts are. So these are some of the reasons that we focus on this and that we hope that you'll enjoy trying it out at home as well. Now, there are a number of different ways to compost. Primarily today, what we're going to focus on is how to build a hot compost pile. That's the style of garden or the style of compost that we use at our Tarrant Area Food Bank Learning Garden. And it is a very efficient and effective composting system. However, there are a number of different ways to compost. So if you decide the hot composting program is more energy output than you want to do, or if it might be too large for the backyard space that you have, here are some other options. Keyhole gardens are a great option if you have just enough room for one garden bed and you want to do your composting in that bed. So this is a round bed with a pie-shaped wedge that has the composting column in the center. And you're going to layer up compost in a similar fashion to what I'll show you with our hot composting system, but it will be right in the middle of that keyhole bed. Then you can water it and the nutrients leach directly into the bed itself. So it's a great efficient system. You can also bury compost. Now, there are two ways to bury compost. There's burying compost actually in an enclosed container, such as this trash can that you can see here. This is a system that allows you to compost food scraps, especially if you have an enclosed bin. So you get a large trash can, drill holes in the bottom and around the sides, and then you're still going to add your food scraps and your compost materials in layers, just like I'll show you here in a minute with our hot compost program. But you'll do that inside this bin and then put a tight-fitting lid on top of it. This is especially effective if you are trying to keep pests and wildlife out of your compost pile because it does have a good, well-fitting lid. Trench composting is another option. This is great for large gardens or urban farms where you might have a long row and you want to bury a ton of food scraps all at once. So if you have a relationship built up with a local restaurant to collect food scraps, this might be a good option for you. It does take a lot of room, so keep that in mind when you're planning out your compost. You're just going to dig a nice deep trench about 1 foot deep, bury those food scraps, and make sure that you cover it well. I usually like to put in about 6 inches deep and then cover it with 6 inches of soil. Those are going to break down over time and nourish your soil that way. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to build a hot compost pile. This is a nice, tidy compost pile that fits very well in a backyard. You can get started on this process by getting a bin if you would like to have a container. You do not have to have a bin or frame to put your compost in, but it does keep it tidier and it makes it easier to turn. This is a shepherd's bin, the wire cage that you see in this picture, and it is exactly the right size. It's either 3 by 3, 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot tall, so it's a cube, or you may find one that's 4 by 4 by 4. Both good sizes. You may also find enclosed compost tumblers or large enclosed bins. There are some pictures of those on your handouts, and I will show you one later in our presentation today as well. So you can build this with whatever frame you'd like. The point is to keep it tidy for your space. Then you need to collect your materials. After you have your frame, you want to collect your materials. So lots of brown materials and lots of green materials. We'll talk about specifics about what is considered brown material and what is considered green material a little bit into our presentation. But it's very important to have a large quantity of each ready to go because you want to build your entire pile in one sitting if you're going to be hot composting. You also need to have a water source nearby, and you want to have a shovel and possibly a pitchfork if you prefer that as your turning method. So once you've wrapped all of your materials together, rounded up all of your materials, it's time to start building your pile. Now, you're going to see an entire shepherd's bin compost pile built in this video. We have the magic of camera and the magic of TV at our disposal. So you get to watch an hour-long process in 10 minutes. When you are doing this at home, please make sure you allow yourself enough time. You will need a full hour to build this size of compost pile. So what you're going to do is start by building your pile in layers. The first layer is always made from brown materials. Brown materials can include anything like dry leaves, cardboard, newspaper, sawdust. Primarily, we use dry leaves. Around here, you can almost always find plenty of leaves in the fall. Do try to round up about 14 bags of leaves for each compost pile this size because it takes more than you think it will. Now, it's always important to add water as you're building your pile. Water is like the sauce of the lasagna. Building a compost pile is much like building a lasagna. It's built in layers, and you want to make sure that there's sauce on every layer. So in other words, you want water on every layer. Now, if you're building a small pile, like our shepherd's bin, it can be a good idea to put all of your leaves in a wheelbarrow and soak them completely. Enough consistent moisture in the pile. So we're finishing up the brown layer here in the video and start adding our green materials. So the next layer will be green. Green materials are high in nitrogen. So that doesn't necessarily mean they have to be green in color. Green materials can include anything like grass clippings, coffee grounds, manure. Now, manure from plant-eating animals. We don't want to include manure from any pets or animals that eat meat. So we're not going to use cat or dog waste in a food-producing system because we want to make sure we're not transmitting any kind of parasites. This is also the layer where you would include food scraps. Fresh fruits and vegetables and eggshells can go directly into your pile. They're It is important to do that safely. We don't want to attract rodents or any kind of wildlife or pests to our compost pile. So we always want to make sure that we are putting the food scraps directly in the center. So we want to get a couple of layers built, and then we want to put the food scraps only in the middle, not touching the edges. And that will help our pile to be safe and sanitary for our backyard and for our neighbors. We want to make sure we keep everyone happy in this process. So what you see right now is grass clippings, which are very high in nitrogen, and then horse manure. We have a wonderful volunteer that contributes that to our efforts. And then food scraps can go in this layer as well. Coffee and tea grounds are also a great addition here. And we'll look later at a list of other items that you can actually put in each layer. When you build your layers of your compost pile, it's very important to keep the carbon to nitrogen ratio in balance. So it's important to have a 3-to-1 ratio of carbon to nitrogen. Now that 3-to-1 is in pounds. Now we do not expect that you are going to weigh out your materials at the beginning of your process. It's much easier to think about this in terms of inches. Leaves are usually a lot lighter than nitrogen-rich materials are, like grass or food scraps or coffee grounds. So usually the rule of thumb that we do when we're building is about 6 to 8 inches of our brown materials, and then about 2 to 3 inch layers of our green materials. And that helps us to keep our piles in balance. So as soon as you have finished the green layer and added water, you want to start in on your next brown layer. You want to make sure these layers are approximately the right ratio as you build, right? You don't need to measure with a ruler unless that's fun for you. You can just look at the side of your pile and approximate. You want to make sure that you have approximately 3-to-1 ratio. And that can be hard to do your first time, so be patient with yourself. Now, you want to have the pile as compact as possible. The water does help to compact the materials, to make sure that you're getting as much material in there as possible, and to make sure that you don't have so much air and space that your pile is going to dry out. Ideally, once you get to the top layer, someone would climb into the pile and stomp on the pile to compress it. You will not see that happen in this video. Just know it's a good idea if you have someone who's willing to climb up in there and stomp it down and then add one more layer on top of it. You always want to start with a brown layer and end with a brown layer. That's very important to keeping the pile from starting a smell, and it's important for the appearance and hygiene of your pile. So you can see that after I added the next brown layer, I'm starting in with our food scraps. The food scraps are only, again, fruit, vegetable, and eggshells. Our piles do not get hot enough when they are this size to kill any kind of contaminants that might come in from milk or meat. We don't want to try to process oils or fats in this kind of system. So that's something that can happen on larger scale commercial systems. Programs that are run by the city typically can compost those types of materials, but it's not something that you can do safely in your own backyard. And that's why we stick to that type of food scrap. So make sure that those don't get right up on the edge. We want to seal in any smell, right? We want to make sure that that's staying safe, and we want to put variety on every layer. That's something that I'll repeat a couple of times because it's really important. Have a variety of materials and build them safely. So you want to make sure, just like you have your carbon and nitrogen in balance, you also want to make sure that you have your air and water in balance. You want your pile to be about 50% water and about 50% air. When you have smaller piles, they need more water because they have a large amount of aeration. It's easy for air to get in and out of a pile this size, especially if you're using a shepherd's bin, which is open on the sides. So you want to add as much water as possible. And what you want to do is, when you think you've put enough water on, dig down a little bit, and you'll see that it's still completely dry inside. Then you need to add more water. Usually when you're building in this kind of system, water will run out the bottom as you build, and that's a good thing. This pile that you're watching us build probably is low on water. When we turn it, we will likely have to add more water. So just know that as much water as you're seeing right now, you probably need to almost double that to make it even more effective. This is the fastest you will ever see anyone build a compost pile. This is a great way to get your strength training. It can also be cardio depending on how fast and how hard you're turning those piles. You can see that this pile is, we're going to fill it all the way up to the top. When you're trying to estimate out how much you need, how many compost piles you want to start, you want to consider that these reduce significantly in mass. So if you have a 3 by 3 by 3, so you have a cubic yard at the beginning, then that would be 27 cubic feet. When you finish, you will only have about 9 cubic feet of finished compost. So you can kind of think through and calculate out how much you need for your garden space and plan accordingly. It will reduce significantly. Even by the first week, it will drop in about a quarter of it. So this pile is almost finished. Getting some more of those greens added in, tucking in any of the fruit and vegetable pieces into the center, and then topping that off with some more brown materials. Now, as you build the pile, you're using all of those materials that you gathered at the beginning. So you want to make sure that you, again, have all of those on hand at the very first. If your pile is huge, if you have a really large pile, you might be able to just build the bottom half and still have it start heating up and then add a second layer on top later. But with a shepherd's bin, you need to build this all at once. So plan on about 14 bags of dry leaves and plan on at least 5 to 10 bags of grass clippings. Now, here are some reminders about things we talked about during the video, things that can go in your pile and things that really should not. First items under the good for the backyard compost list, all the way down to cardboard, are examples of brown materials. This information is also on your handout that was attached to the Eventbrite registration, and we will email these out at the end of the presentation as well. If you've had a hard time finding those handouts, make sure that those are sent out to you also. Everything from grass clippings down on that should add list are green materials. So that gives you some ideas. This is not an exclusive list. There are tons of options, but this is a good starting place and some of the ones that we most commonly have. Just some reminders on things that should not go into a pile that you're building. Now, we get questions often about what to do with adding produce scraps if you're doing a cold compost pile. So in other words, if you are building a compost pile in your backyard, but you're not building it all at once, you're just throwing some stuff in day after day, week after week, when you have it available. So this is an example of a cold compost pile. It's a pile that you add a little bit to when you have it available. To do that safely, remember to bury your food scraps. Don't ever leave food scraps exposed on the top of a compost pile because that's going to attract things that you don't want. So cover them up, and then it's a good idea to add in some leaves when you have them. Just keep adding those. Make sure that if you're building this kind of pile, if there's any chance that it's not heating up, make sure you get a good well-fitting lid like the one that you see here. That makes sure that you have a nice contained amount of compost and you're able to add to that whenever you're ready, and you can also use from it whenever you're ready. So once your compost pile is built, then what? Then what do you do? So what you want to do next is let the pile sit. You've done your job, you've built the pile, now you wait. So you're going to wait for at least a week, And it's going to start heating up. The microorganisms that live inside of that pile are going to start doing their work. You've given them all the ingredients to be successful. They just have to go to work. Once they start working, a byproduct of their activity and their decomposition process of all of these materials is heat. Your pile is going to start to heat up to about 150 to 160 degrees. So this is a good time to use a compost thermometer, which is a great tool to have on hand. I highly recommend getting one if you're able. Those compost thermometers are about 2.5 to 3 feet long, and you can put them down into the center of your pile to accurately measure the temperature. When it's hot, it's working. When it starts to cool off below 135, you know it needs more oxygen or it needs more water. So you're going to want to turn that pile. Now, if you don't have a compost thermometer, you don't need to worry. You can just do this based on a week. You know, you can let it sit for a week and then turn it, and let it sit for another week and then turn it. It may not be quite as efficient. You may not be maximizing your hot time and turning it as soon as it's cool, but it will still work if you don't have that piece of equipment. That's okay. So when you turn that pile, what you're doing is putting oxygen in, and then you can add water in at the same time. You're going to repeat that turning process until everything is broken down. So when your pile stops heating up, you know it's ready. Usually that takes 3 to 4 turns. Typically, it's a week to 2 weeks between turns if you are optimizing your pile turning. If you have a very large pile, that time may increase. So it may take 2 to 3 to 4 weeks before you're ready to turn it, depending on the size of your pile. But keeping track of your temperature will help you to know when it's time to turn it. Once you have it finished heating up, then you can run it through a screen. You can sift that compost, and that will actually take out large sticks. It will take out any trash that might be in the pile, any rocks that manage to get mixed in. You can use a large framed out screen like this one, or you can just get a piece of screen and put it over the edges of your wheelbarrow, and that works just fine as well. I've heard lots of people have good ideas on this. So, I mean, you could even get a trash can and put a screen on the bottom and then fill the trash can and shake it to let the finished compost come out the bottom. This is a good place to get creative. The reason we're doing this step is that getting those large chunks of wood out helps the nitrogen that's in that compost be available to your plants in the garden. If you don't sift them out, it's okay. It's not going to hurt your garden, but it will take longer for that nitrogen to be available to your plants because it's going to be tied up in that decomposition process of the wood. Also, nice soft finished compost like what you see here does come in contact better with the roots of your plants, and that can be a helpful tool as well. So that's how you screen compost. Now, in that process of turning, you may occasionally come across some problems. So if you notice any of the following problems, here's what to do about them. If you notice a large smell or a bad smell that's not earthy, right? Compost should smell earthy. If it smells like rot or like something has gone anaerobic, it probably needs more of your carbon materials, more of your brown leaves, and or it needs more air. So either of those things can help fix that problem. If it's too dry, you can add water. You may also want to increase the size of your pile if you're seeing that it's drying out in places. It may just be too small. If it is staying too wet, then you can add in some more of your brown materials will help with that some, but you may also want to add in some aeration materials like larger sticks or possibly a tube or a column that allows some airflow. Now, if you notice that it's damp and there's plenty of moisture in your pile and you know you've been turning it, but it's still not really heating up, you may need more nitrogen. After the first turn, I do not recommend adding food scraps. So once you have gone through that first week and turned your pile, if you need more nitrogen, add things like coffee grounds or rabbit manure, chicken manure, or you can even add in that stage cottonseed meal, and that will be a good compost activator to help continue to break down your brown materials. So hopefully that will help you troubleshoot. This is a great time for questions if anyone has some. So if there are any questions that you have not chatted in or have not answered yet, we would love to hear those now. What you're looking at is a picture of our 4-bin system. A 3-bin system is typical even in backyards. It can be constructed out of pallets if you like. At the Learning Garden, again, we have very large piles. This is a community garden, not a backyard. And so what you're seeing here are larger piles, and we add that 4th bin so that we can also have kind of a storage and sifting one in addition to our processing bins. So if there are no questions, we will encourage you to watch this recorded class on our YouTube site, as well as other classes that we have recorded and posted there. We do hope that you'll join us for future classes. You can register for those on Eventbrite, just like you did for this class. A great question has come in about garden waste. Garden waste is absolutely a green material and a great thing to put into your compost pile. If you, so garden waste is things like tomato plants that are cut up. If you have off-season crops that you're pulling out. So for instance, right now, a lot of us are taking out tomato plants, pepper plants that maybe have finished up if they're not still producing. Any of those materials you want to cut up into 6 to 8 inch pieces. You don't want them to get tangled around your pitchfork or your shovel when you go to turn that pile. So go ahead and chop them up, and you can add those in the green layers. So this is any leafy plant waste. Now, there are some differences of opinion of garden and yard waste can be added into compost piles. If you are hot composting and you are consistently getting to the temperatures that we're suggesting, then it's okay to add some things that have seeds like weed seeds, and sometimes it can even be okay to add some plant material that maybe had a pest problem or a fungal problem. If it was a significant plant disease or a significant pest problem, and your pile, maybe you're new to this and it's not getting as hot as you think it should, it's not reaching up to 160, you may want to consider letting that material not go into your pile. If you're passive composting, I would not suggest including garden waste that has a lot of pests or a lot of plant diseases, because you don't want to put those back out on your garden the next season when you distribute that compost. So I hope that helped answer the question a little bit. And if there were any other questions, again, please feel free to do follow us on social media. We do post a lot of our material on these sites, and we will look forward to seeing you at classes that are listed on Eventbrite. I hope that you'll join us out at the Learning Garden if you and our Kindred Spirits Kitchen Garden for work days. If you live near Fort Worth, Texas, we would love for you to get some hands-on experience with composting. Thank you for being here. We hope you'll have a great day.